failure is tough to talk about, right?
It
It's,
is.
you don't really want to highlight that, especially out in our professional circles. Oh, I failed this stuff.
Right.
We're all failing all the time. I think that's probably one of the
Yes.
stats I could have brought is 100% of us fail at something at some point in our lives. Like that's just part of
Right.
life. We all sometimes experience failures, and sometimes they push us in new directions, or we learn new things about ourselves that change how we approach our work.
You're not alone. We've all been there. Hi, and welcome to the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting. This season, we're welcoming fellow coaches back to the show to explore how people can move beyond naming and claiming their talents and start to aim their talents. We're calling this season Strengths Applied.
And today, our topic is bouncing back from failure. You might have noticed it's just Chad and I today. And I'm actually okay with that because failure isn't necessarily something that's like that easy to talk about. So super excited. It's going to be a little different because I don't think we're bringing any stats to this conversation today, but just to level set us, I wanted to talk about what failure is. So we're going to define failure. So Webster's definition says it is the omission of occurrence or performance, specifically a failing to perform a duty or expected action, maybe a state of inability to perform, a lack of success, a falling short in business, or just strictly falling short. Why I wanted to talk about this one today is because I think that there are times when we fall short of our own and others' expectations. And I think how we handle those is really what makes the difference. I'm hoping today in this episode, we can help you give you some tips and tricks to give yourself grace when you do fall short. Maybe find the learning nugget that's available to you from this falling short, failing experience. And just overall, you're not alone. We've all been there.
Yep. So, hi, everybody. I am here. For those of you listening, wondering where's Chad's voice, I
Right.
am here. I wanted to let Jen start. Jen, I think you did an awesome job, including the
Thanks.
definition of failure there. I think it's going to tie into a lot of thoughts I had around this topic when we first started talking about putting this episode together, and not just failures within our roles, but how sometimes those failures push us into different directions. I
Yeah.
got thinking a little bit about this around sort of how sometimes failures might mean taking new career directions or
Mm.
discovering something about ourselves. And so I think it's awesome that you've brought in that definition from Merriam-Webster's. um, I think one of the other things for those of you out there that might be listening to this and go, well, yeah, I've kind of maybe failed in one line of work before, and that pushed me to take something on. Know that you're not alone. In coming up in preparing for this, I came across this interesting stat
Oh,
that between 27 and 54% of people that have gone and pursued higher education have earned usually a bachelor's degree. Um, that number of people are not employed in a job that is associated with their field of study. So we all sometimes experience failures, and sometimes they push us in new directions, or we learn new things about ourselves that change how we approach our work. And so I think that that's just really important to keep in mind as we have this conversation. And why I wanted to talk about it, because I think we have another coach that we know that talks about squiggly careers, and
yeah.
sometimes failures are part of those, right?
Right.
So I think bouncing back or even bouncing forward from some of those career changes is also something to keep in mind. So whether you're in the role and you made a failure, or you failed at something, doesn't necessarily mean you're a failure. You just failed to do something.
True.
But then also, you know, also do those failures then push you into learning something new about yourself? So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because we can all beat ourselves up around what we failed at, and I'd like to think that those are more learning opportunities. So
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
Chad,
anyway,
I'm glad you brought the squiggly careers thing in. And that stat is speaks to me. I'm one of those 27 to 50 something percent that you just said. I don't remember numbers that easily, but I'm one of those. I went to school for something drastically different than what I'm doing today. But I can say that all of those different squiggly changes along the way have made a difference to what I'm doing. So let's dive into that like personal experience. Chad, you get to go first.
oh,
What has been
hey,
your experience?
she's putting me on the spot right away
Yes,
because there is no
right on the
guest.
spot.
No, so I think just a real quick summary of my sort of squiggly line. I was a history major when I went to college. Um, that my undergraduate experience made me have a real appreciation for higher ed. So I then got into admissions, and then alumni relations and fundraising, and that then led, because actually I was faltering on something within my fundraising work. I was not a fantastic writer, but I feel like I've gotten better and keep practicing at it. Um, but my leader at the time, a great guy, encouraged me to start taking a graduate writing course, and then that turned into almost a, I won't say accidental. I know that our last guest talked about sort of accidentally coming upon a
Mm-hmm.
sobriety journey. Um, but with my deliberative and my analytical and discipline and all the rest, I put some thought into it and ended up with a master's in administration, and which is really sort of an MBA with a lot of liberal arts mixed in. I loved doing coursework in team dynamics and even a little bit of coaching and what it
Sure.
is to work in HR and so forth. And so, but all that was sort of spurred by I was faltering or failing at generating really good writing. So I think that that's sort of a first place where I sort of bounced forward into something,
Yeah.
um, and has led me to where I am today as a coach. But before I got to coaching, I tried my hand at an organization called the Vermont Futures Project, which had a very strong emphasis on people and trying to make the best of our workforce here in Vermont. There still are some major concerns with, do we have a big enough workforce for the population, and how can we build the population so we have the kind of workforce that we need. But as I did that work, my learner, my analytical got all jazzed up. But what I realized is that some of my other themes were not being fed. And we're going to get into themes here in a minute. But
Mm,
this leads to, I was not great at envisioning that long-term policy that was really needed in that organization. And upon reflection, that comes back to my discipline, my responsibility. I wanted to know when we had achieved the goal, right? I wanted to
yeah.
fulfill the promise. And so I wasn't fantastic at that. And there were some other things that I was kind of faltering at, or maybe even failing. Um, and that really led to this discovery, like I need to be in a position, in a role where I have some immediate control. There's a set timeline. And that
Yeah.
ties into like the coaching programs that we do, or that we have a certain amount of time with a client, and then we reassess, and does it still make sense to keep coaching.
Yeah.
But those sorts of set timelines or a set program or kind of a cadence really tie much better into a lot of my talents um, than doing long-term policy. Long-term policy just doesn't. I was not thriving at that. I was faltering and failing at it because they were not jiving with my talents. And I think we're going to
Mm,
explore that a little bit when we get into to our themes and how they play. But that's my kind of like, that's how failure has kind of informed
yeah.
my career journey, as like, oh, I discover I'm not great at something. Okay, so what does that then teach me about where I need to be next? So I'm going to stop there. I want to pose the question back to
Yeah.
you, Jen, in terms of like what's been your experience with bouncing back from failure, or maybe squiggly career. You mentioned you're not in the your coaching is not what
Right.
you went to school for. So
No.
so fill us in a little bit about where failures have played a role in your life.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up about your like talents not being fed and you needing that like immediate, maybe not immediate, but a timeline, like a
Yeah.
deadline, like you know when it's ending. And this like that policy work was was not giving in, feeding you where you wanted to. That is, I can so resonate with that. I mean, all my executing talents, that shouldn't be a surprise, but I can really resonate with that. I went to school for architecture and facilities management, and I had a lot of jobs in architectural firms. I guess I shouldn't say a lot of jobs. I had a few different specific jobs in the architectural firm. And while those were good in some respects, my first one was the best because I literally was on site drawing like details for construction on scratchy paper, putting them into the system and then running them out onto the field to have the guys like start building it. And this is what it's supposed to look like. That was an amazing experience. That was not normal. And I didn't necessarily know that until I had spent some more time in the architectural field, where it's like you do something, you draw something, and years later it gets built. So it was very, very different timeline. And I would say the same was true of furniture and having, you know, that like the projects, the big projects were really amazing and really fun to do. But it was so long, you know, like we had to wait for the construction to be done. By then we had already ordered the furniture, and maybe it will fit, maybe it won't by the time the construction gets completed. So like watching something and waiting for it to be done, I felt like it was never done. It's way out there in the future. And I needed that more immediate response, which I will say coaching definitely gives me. And it feeds that, like, well, you know, those other talents in me that I love to see, those like interactions with things. I will say, looking back though, I can't say that I feel like I failed at those roles. And not to say that I don't fail, because I fail at lots of things, little things and big things, probably every day. But I feel like that failure for me is more about that like unmet expectation. And in every instance where I feel like I haven't lived up to those expectations I had for myself, I've really like found it hard to celebrate the wins. Like, what did I accomplish in that moment? So I think it's a lot of spending the time to understand. Like for me personally, it was spending the time to understand when I did fail, when something didn't go the way I expected. What did I learn from it though? And how can I put that into like what I can do with my next situations?
Yeah.
Sometimes these weren't my failures either. It was on someone else, like it was completely out of my control. And in those cases, I started to do things like lowering my expectations. And I don't know that was the best it's like, if you don't have any expectations, you can't be hurt. Like if you don't, you know, if you don't set the expectation, or you have super low expectations, then like people can most likely meet them. But it's really not a good way to live. It didn't feel great to expect low things of others. It didn't feel great to expect low things of myself. So I think personally and professionally, relationships are really hard in both places without realistic expectations. So I think that's kind of where mine goes to this, like, it's that failure to meet that expectation, whether that was in a role at a job where I wasn't quite suited for what I was doing. I could do the work, but it didn't feel great. And it wasn't meeting the expectations, my own, maybe, or others. And then the same with relationships, like having a relationship fail, a marriage fail, felt like a failure, a giant failure. And then to stay in it so long felt like even more of a failure. So if we're getting on that personal side of it, there are pieces to that where I had specific expectations. I think my ex had specific expectations, and neither one of us had ever discussed what those were in order for that relationship really to have thrived and been what it should have been. Now, looking back, I can say that that's okay, because we learn from these things that happen to us.
So just talking about learning, Jen, first of all, awesome. Thank you very much for being so vulnerable. What you just shared, though, I think highlights two aspects of this failure. You know, this failure, call it an equation. Here's my analytical again, right? Putting everything in an equation.
Yep, got to put it in math.
But but I think there are two parts here, which is the expectations we have of ourselves and have we failed those expectations, and then there are the externally determined expectations, and then what measuring stick are we
Yes.
failing against? So for a lot of the leaders or even individual contributors that you and I coach, they're the goals that are set by the organization. Oh, you'll
Right.
raise X number of dollars, or oh, you'll go recruit number of people, or oh, you're going to design X number of workplaces,
Right.
workspaces in your design work. Those are all externally defined. And then have we failed against those, or have we failed against the things we hold for ourselves? And I think
Right.
sometimes others' expectations are higher than our own. Sometimes our expectations are higher than others expect of us. So, like my very first year in admissions, I was given a goal. I think it was, I had a very large but distant territory from the recruiting territory from the school I was recruiting for. And they wanted, I don't know, 20 kids from my area. And that was going to be a big number if we got past 20. I was like, 30 seems a lot more doable. I ended up
Right.
getting 40 kids, which was fantastic. And
Nice.
that
Yeah.
was not a failure. That was a celebration. But I think it highlights the difference of the
Mhm.
internal versus the external. I thought you brought that up really well. And I think, as you say, some people need to get, you and I included, need to give ourselves grace around, are we, holding ourselves or calling ourselves failures, or we have failed at something because we didn't meet our expectations or because we didn't meet somebody else's expectations. And then also
Yes.
you shared about the expectations we have of others. Oh, I'm only going to be able to succeed at my role if this other person meets my
Right.
expectations for a timeline or for what they contribute or whatever else.
Yep.
And so that's actually almost a little like mini third circle in that grander equation or Venn
Right.
diagram, if that's the way you want to process it. But I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind as we go through this, is that sometimes we might fail at things where we actually haven't failed. We've just failed our own expectations. And
Right.
then there's also we failed because we didn't meet somebody else's preset goal or preset expectations. So just
Yep.
something that I thought was really powerful out of what you said.
Well, thanks.
Um,
I think the other thing we do too, specifically achievers tend to do that, is we move the goalpost. Like if we
oh
meet
yeah,
that, we move the goalpost, and rather than celebrating that we met that like initial,
yeah,
like maybe it's someone else's expectation. I think that's something to do with the responsibility in us too. Someone's
yeah,
expectation was here. We set it here. And then we're before when we got close, we moved it. And then we're like, oh, we didn't make that last one. Like, I guess we
yeah,
didn't make it. We've exceeded all those other ones, but
right, yeah.
for us, still, it feels a little bit like a failure. Yeah.
No, I could completely resonate with that. I do think it comes from a lot of that. Both you and I have high responsibility in our top talent themes.
Yeah.
I can see your achiever coming to play in there. Like, oh, I achieved this, so there's got to be another goal somewhere in there, right?
Another
Um,
level, right? Yeah.
and then we don't achieve that, and then we start labeling the whole experience. I know, as you're talking about, I thought immediately back to years I've had really good fundraising years when I was in my previous work, and also admissions, like that very first year. Oh, easily I can do 20 or 22 kids. So
Yep.
move the goalpost, make it 30. And then, oh,
Yep.
wait, we're getting really close to 30 and we still have another month and a half of recruiting time. Maybe I
Let's
can
go
make it
for
to
more.
40, or,
Yeah.
I wanted to actually double. I think my official goal was 22 and I wanted to make it 44. I got to 40 and I was kind of bummed because I didn't get those last four kids to straight up double it, but I nearly doubled
Right.
what was expected out of my recruiting territory. So I think
Yeah.
there's some value in seeing sort of the scope of our failure.
Yes.
And is it self-designed failure, or is it
Right.
we've actually failed, like we have failed to meet the goals of the institution or our own business, development goals.
Yeah.
So anyway, just
Yeah.
I'm really
It's
glad we
good.
got into that because
Me too.
as you and I were talking about before we started actually recording, failure is tough to talk about, right?
It
It's,
is.
you don't really want to highlight that, especially out in our professional circles. Oh, I failed this stuff.
Right.
We're all failing all the time. I think that's probably one of the
Yes.
stats I could have brought is 100% of us fail at something at some point in our lives. Like that's just part of
Right.
life. So,
Yes.
anyway,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
moving this conversation forward, we've already started to touch on themes a little bit.
Yes.
And this is being a strengths based, talent based podcast.
Right.
I'm curious, Jen, as you think about how you have addressed bouncing back from failure,
Yeah.
are there themes that have been super helpful and maybe even some that have been less than helpful?
You know there are. Okay,
Right.
so as it pertains to failure, I would say there's a few specific ones that have definitely helped me bounce. Now, whether that's bouncing back, bouncing forward, I love that, by the way. And now I wish we would have changed the name to bounce forward. We might have to do like a slash forward over the back, because I like that idea of the bouncing forward.
Yeah.
What the ones that I feel like have helped me bounce would be, of course, belief. There
Mm.
is something bigger at play. This is more important than me. There's something, bigger, a bigger scope, a bigger something going on that I have to believe that there is a reason things are happening the way they're happening, and that it's going to be okay, and I'm going to get
Mm.
something from this. Like I won't
Okay.
end with nothing, even if I fail miserably. Um, Adaptability. I like to talk about my adaptability. I think that constant shifting of priorities based on others' needs in a safe space is really good. Like it gives me that opportunity to like, okay, if this isn't working, I can shift really quickly, especially if this is dealing with another person or helping someone else out. I'm like, okay, we're not getting where we want to go. And I've had this with clients as well. We're not getting where I want to go. Like we set goals. I wanted to go here. You said you wanted to go here, but we're not going there. Like we're
Right.
clearly going somewhere else. It's okay. My adaptability can be like, all right, we said we were doing that, but let's go here. Like it seems like that's where you need to go. Let's spend some time there. Let's go there. And I think in safe places, that's really good. In unsafe places with unsafe people, being adaptable like that maybe isn't quite so good. But we're gonna keep to the good side of this. Achiever. I think achiever is another one of those that like helps me bounce for sure, because it's that like inner drive to keep going. Like I can make this happen. Like I just have to dig in deeper. I have to pull my sleeves up higher, whatever that might be. Like I can get there. Because my achiever will help me push through it. And then consistency, I think is another one. When I failed in the past, like even something simple like forgetting my wallet or my purse at home. I can't tell you how often I forget my wallet or my purse at home, or my keys in the ignition in the car, lock the car, shut the door. Okay, now I have lots of little structures and different things in place to keep me like that, my consistency, that having a structure, having my purse in the same place every time, putting my keys in the same place every time, doing things a specific way, or having backup keys, different things in order to keep me from like failing in the future. And if I do, I have those like quick, easy ways like, oh, okay, this is how I can take care of that so
Mm.
that won't happen in the future. Um, Activator, of course, my activator. I think as my confidence grows, my activator grows with it. Like it will
Mm.
go stronger and do more and push me farther into risky places. But when it comes to risk and failure, specifically, if I think I can't do something or nothing good will come from this, my activator will not step in. It does not push me past
Interesting.
it. My deliberative is a hard, hard break. So I will say deliberative is the one for sure, the one, but there are two, the one that has kept me from taking risks and failing. Because if I don't already believe in some way that I can do this, I will not engage. So that one, it's tough because people tell me a lot like, oh, well, like when I've talked to other coaches, they'll be like, oh, well, if your activators, getting too excited, like lean on your deliberative. Slippery slope.
Slippery slope, yes.
you put that brake on and it may not come back off. So
Right.
it's very dangerous. And then I'd say my responsibility too, like as well as that, as much as that can be helpful because it's helping me keep my eyes on the prize and going for it, it's also kept me pushing for an expectation that might not have been realistic because
Yeah.
it's that like I have to because I made a promise. And going back to those like the adaptability in the safe places versus unsafe places, if I made a promise and I've put myself in an unsafe place, that can be really dangerous. Like now I've made a promise, I'm staying here despite what's good for me. And I think those two, like the deliberative and the responsibility, have great qualities. But when it comes to like the bouncing back from failure, I can't say that either of those two have been terribly
Super
helpful
helpful.
in the
Yeah.
bouncing back or bouncing forward. But definitely keeping me from failing. Deliberative has, but it
Yeah.
also cuts off my legs in some
Yeah.
respects.
Oh, it's so interesting you bring those up, Jen. This is one of the places where you and I have a lot of similarities in terms of how
Why
we
we
see
started
fulfillment.
why we started this podcast
Right,
with the
right.
deliberative responsibility. Yes.
Yeah. So, it's interesting you talk about that slippery slope with deliberative and, I think failing at things can heighten that risk awareness. So you become even more, okay, I don't want to fail again. So I'm not going to step forward into something super new. And then, that combined with the responsibility, what you were saying about, making promises to people. And as you really highlighted, if you're in sort of a psychologically unsafe place, if you don't have a team or a
Yes.
leader around you that's going to be like, hey, you aren't a failure, you just like goofed, and we're going to use this as a learning opportunity. If you don't have that, boy, responsibility then really starts to be like, okay, what do I or don't I want to promise going forward? And you know because you don't want to be perceived as failing at something again. um, and that it's basically a deliberative responsibility, vicious
Loop.
cycle that
Yes.
gets loop that gets started. um, because I want to broaden this back out and bring
Yes.
in some other like helpful, because I want this to maybe
Yes,
resonate with
please.
some other people that don't have our deliberative responsibility. So I'm going to throw out some
Right.
other themes that people might jive with. So for me, in terms of addressing kind of that bouncing back, my learner, I've become more and more aware of as a tool or a toolbox to go to, because I'll try and do two things with it. One is learn from the experience. Okay, what can I take away from that mistake? As hard as that is to deal with, as we just said, it's hard to talk about failure. It's hard to accept that you have failed at something, especially when you have high responsibility like we do. But I've been trying more and more to use Learner as a sort of a reflective tool. Okay, what can I learn from that experience that I can take into the next one? And then also, going back to my sort of squiggly career, I've always used Learner as the main engine for when I get into a new environment or a new experience. The thing that then sort of drives me forward. I hear you talk a lot about your activator and your achiever.
Yep.
My learner is sometimes the thing that actually gets me off the starting line. Oh, what can I go learn new today that then might set me up for less or fewer failures going forward? What can I learn ahead of time to prepare myself so I make really thoughtful, educated, um, you know, whether it's approximations or setting goals or starting to put numbers to certain initiatives. What can I learn around me that helps me do that? So it's all about applying that near term learning, right? Okay, so the other two that kind of we talked about the responsibility deliberative duo. The other duo that I would say is that discipline and achiever can actually be helpful in bouncing back because they start to create the path and the process. So, okay, I've learned this. Now, what am I going to do with it? How can I arrange things differently next time to avoid that failure happening again.
Yep.
It's not always foolproof, as we just said. We're going to 100% fail at something at some point in
Right.
our lives. Um, but I think that that discipline and achiever can actually be helpful in bouncing back because they can start to set the roadmap. Now, the less helpful ones you've already touched on, deliberative, and I think you pretty much echoed everything I was going to say about deliberative. Like, it is that speed break. You see one failure, you're like, I
Yeah.
don't want to do that again.
Nope.
Crank it again. So
Yes.
uh with that being said, I'm going to highlight two others that
Oh,
may get in the way
okay.
of bouncing back. And this kind of loops into deliberative and its connectedness, believe it or not, because I start to see all the intertied, like, oh, if I don't, like, if I take this step and I fail, it's going to cause that failure, it's going to cause that failure, it's going to cause that to fail, it's going to have an impact on a colleague that I really respect. I don't want to make that first step and fail at something because it's going to impact them. So
Ah,
seeing sort of the interconnectedness of all the other decisions or what my failure might mean to other people can sometimes make me sit in the failure longer than I probably should, or
oh,
sit in not taking the next action as much as I probably
yeah.
should. Um, and then I think the other one is analytical because we want it to work out. We need to know, like,
Yeah.
we want the proof that, okay, if I step out of this failure, if I try and learn from something, or if I try to do something again, I want to make sure it works. And so it's an analytical,
Yeah.
deliberative kind of combo that comes to play because
Sure.
we want to, essentially proof it out and know that we're not going to fail, but we know that there's still a 50-50, like, well, I shouldn't say a 50-50, but there's a potential that we're going to fail
Right.
at some point.
It feels like
Um,
50-50 at that point, right? Like
it does, it
you
does.
either fail or you don't.
Right.
There is no gray area. There's no
Yeah.
percentage to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is tough for an analytical because we want to put the odds in our favor.
Right.
So again, that's where it becomes a little less helpful is we want to try and um we want to sort of game it out and make sure that all the proof is there. Like, okay, we're going to do all these steps. And then that's going to then sort of feed into that responsibility you were talking about of, oh, I can fulfill my promises, but I need to have proof. And so when the proof's not there, or you're still trying to learn, still trying to take the lessons from your failure and apply it forward, the proof's not always there. And therefore it
Right.
becomes a little less helpful in trying to bounce in a
Wow.
positive direction. So,
Oh,
um,
those are great examples, Chad. Thank you
yeah,
so much for like doing the groupings of them too. Like I like that you talked about that duo of your discipline and your achiever. I mean,
arranger,
I love
arranger.
or sorry, arranger. Yeah. You know how much I love the discipline and how much I wish I had that. Like I have to use my consistency and other people's disciplines to help me put the structure in place. But once the structure's there, if I follow it, with my consistency, I typically can get there. Oh, I love those. I love those so much. I want to switch gears on us a little bit and
Sure.
go into our next phase of the conversation about those who may be struggling to be seen or heard, and then we can get to managers too. But
Yeah.
so, do you have some ideas for those bouncing back, bouncing forward
Yeah.
with respect to this?
So I know this is a group of people that you often do a lot of coaching around. So I'm coming with my thoughts, but I'm sure you're going to
I
have a
love it.
lot more to add than
Yeah.
I am. I I started to think about this more from kind of the squiggly career aspect
Yeah,
versus sort of maybe learning from a failure within
sure.
your current role, and then what do you do with it? So I think for the two big points I want to hit on are, if you're struggling to be seen and heard and you're struggling to bounce back from failures, maybe it's time to find a new room in the sense of find a new environment, find the next job. Like, that might be a cue that you're in the wrong environment for yourself. I got thinking a little bit about, if you're a strategic thinker sitting in a room full of doers and your strategic thinking keeps failing to land
Yeah.
and be understood by those around you, maybe it's time to move on. Or maybe you're a
Yep.
doer. I know I was thinking about you a little bit when I wrote this. Thinking about somebody with like Jen's awesome group of talents, which are all in the executing. It's all about doing. But then if she's in a room with a bunch of people that are all about the relationship building, I think you touched upon this in one of our
Yep.
previous episodes. Um, yes, you have some value to that group because you are one of the few doers. But if it's not landing, if it's failing to
Right.
connect with those relationship building inspired or talented individuals,
Yep.
might be a time to move on. You need a different room to be seen and heard in a more open way, which
Yep.
I think also leads into the second big point I want to make. And you've already touched on it a little bit, which is how psychologically safe is your
Yeah.
environment? You know, if you're struggling to be seen and heard and you don't have a comfort level to speak up about your own failures or where you have fallen short of expectations. I'm trying to remember all the aspects of the definition
Yeah.
you read
Right.
off of, you know, failing to meet expectations or failing to complete a project or whatever. But if you don't have permission or even the feeling of openness to be able to bring those things up
Yep.
with your team, with your leader, within the entire organization, that might be another cue to, hey, is this really the right environment for yourself? Um, you know, kind of along that same line, are your mistakes or failures viewed as learning opportunities, or are
Right.
they seen as sort of black marks on your record? You and you again are
Yeah.
high responsibility. Like if we don't fulfill something, it feels like
Yep.
we've let people down, or it's sort of a black mark on our reputation. But is that actually legit being held against you on your performance evaluations or um, other conversation you might be having with your leader? If they are, time to find a new room. Failures are
Yeah.
going to happen. They should be viewed more as learning opportunities, but you need to be in the right environment, psychologically safe environment for those types of conversations to happen. So I think those would be the two things. I know that's a lot of emphasis on moving on, but
Yeah.
I really think if people are struggling to be seen and heard, that might be a cue. You're not in the right group.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
can have different differences of opinion, but if those aren't even being considered,
Respected. Yeah.
heard and respected, yeah, times for something different. And that's where you kind of maybe use a failure to connect with your team as an opportunity to bounce forward into another opportunity. So
Oh,
that would be my two contributions to the conversation. I know
yeah.
you do a lot of coaching on
Yeah.
this group, so I'm going to let you take the ball from there. I'm sure you've got
Well,
some other great insights.
Chad, I loved yours. That finding a new room is absolutely something they should do because we can't. It's like a swimmer, a great strong swimmer being thrown in the pool with four people who can't swim. Like they are going to grab onto you, and you cannot swim them out of there and into safety. Like they will drag you down. So I think at some point we do need to realize like whether or not we're safe in this space. So I love that you brought that up. The other thing I think we like as individuals tend to, and especially if you're like feeling in that like stuck, that failure cycle and can't seem to pull yourself out of it, I think a lot of that is because we see ourselves as the cause of the failure. Like it's something within us that caused this to happen this way. And when you get to that place where you only see your own like place in that, it's really hard to see if there are any external factors that were not in your control. And so you start to feel like everything is in your control and that nothing out there was out of your control. And when you get to that point, everything becomes your fault. So I think being able to pinpoint those things that you really have control over and those that you don't can help you start to even see the small wins. Like this thing happened. This is where I was. This big thing happened, but this much is what I had control over. Okay, so I can see I won like this little piece within that portion that I had control, and the rest of it that was completely out of my control. There was only so much I could do, So you can start to see your own wins. And please don't push to control things that are out of your control. I think that's the other thing that happens. We talked about that with our deliberative when we start feeling unsafe. we start to try to control everything around us. And doing that just makes that cycle even stronger. And that, like, now it's my fault, it's my fault, it's my fault. Like that just keeps happening over and over again. So I think really focusing on those things that you control. And if we're getting into talents around that, what talents could you tap into that will help increase your momentum in those areas where you do have control? Because if you are out of control, you're not able to remove yourself to a different room. In Chad's example, what are the things you have control over, and what maybe are some of those talents you can tap into that will help you, like, kind of pick things up, bounce in a different direction, or at least keep you moving. And then the other one I would say would be, like, as far as talents go, like, what talents could you tap into where you can give yourself the grace that you need to be in the place that you are, understand where you are, what's going on with you, what you can control, what you can't. And then, like, knowing, like, it's okay. Everybody has these moments. We all fail. Like Chad said, 100% of us are going to fail at something at some point in our life. So where can you take those different talents that you have to love yourself? Maybe you're giving some acknowledgments to the things that you have done well, your good works. Give yourself some credit for what you've accomplished in the place that you are, even though this failure has happened. Not everything was bad. There are things that we can learn from that. And so where can you give yourself some credit over what you've been through, what you're learning? And I think that kind of wraps that up in the bow. If you can't bounce to another room, like, how can we give ourselves some credit?
Yeah. Jen, I love the fact that you brought up that circle of control. And I was talking with somebody else recently about the three circles, right? You've got your circle of
Mm,
control, you got your circle of influence where you can say something, you might be able to,
great.
nudge a decision in a certain direction, but it's not ultimately your call. And then
Yep.
there's just what is it, 80% of the stuff
Right.
going on in the world is completely outside our control.
Yep.
Um, and I think that's something that a lot of us need to remember, especially those of us with some of the themes that we've talked about: discipline,
Yeah.
deliberative, responsibility.
Yeah.
That we want, especially those with the executing themes.
Yeah.
We want to be able to do everything, or we want to be able to pull all the levers on our schedule. And
Yep.
that was just, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because
Yeah. Thanks.
I do think that is a really good guidepost for, is it time for you to move to, and
Yep.
we're saying move to a new room. What we really mean is move to a new work environment,
Role,
right? Right. You
job,
need to find a new role,
boss,
a new job.
something.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
you got to change up some aspect of your current
Yeah.
environment. And we're using the analogy of moving to a different room,
The room. Hmm.
but it's changing. What's that saying? You're the average of the five people you spend the most time
Yes.
around. And if
Right.
the room that you're filling those people with are not allowing you to be seen and heard, and
Right.
you don't have the level of control that you should or could, is it time to move to a different room surrounded by different people doing
Yeah.
different things that are maybe a little bit more in tune with, or psychologically safe
Yes.
with who you are?
Get out
So
of the pool if you're surrounded by those drowning.
right.
Grab one person,
No,
save them, but don't try to save them all.
yeah.
Sorry, your
Um,
different room in the five people that made me go back to my drowning person, my
oh, okay.
drowning group again. Sorry,
Yeah. Um, yeah.
sidetracked. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just
Yeah,
really
great.
appreciate you bringing that up, because I think the
Thanks.
the circles of control and circle of influence is really important in this conversation. Um, Speaking of the people that we have around us,
Yes.
I want to move this to the managers, because we know
Yes.
that
Definitely.
new managers are often under a ton of pressure. They may have moved themselves. This is their new room, and
Yes.
so I do some coaching in this area, but I know that you also have been coaching some leaders recently. So I'm curious, what advice do you have to help brand new managers
Yeah.
use their talents to bounce back from their failures, whether it's a failure that
Okay.
they're sort of leaving behind and changing the room, or maybe they're new at something in their new role and they failed at something. How do they bounce back? How do they use their talents to
Oh,
bounce back?
Then that's a good question. I didn't think of it from that perspective necessarily when I was thinking about when I was preparing my
Yeah.
ideas for today, but I think understanding that we should use our failures maybe as a signal to learning.
Okay.
So if a new manager is feeling like they're failing or they've like gone through some failure and they're now bouncing forward, bouncing back, maybe using your talents to understand what has happened in the past that's put you in the place where you were so that maybe you can learn from that moving forward. I think that would maybe it's that like opportunity to learn it, and I don't always love that like when people would come to you and be like, I have an opportunity for you, and you're like, oh no, here we go. Um, but I think that's a good place to start, especially with new managers who are like me, maybe doing some of that bouncing back, bouncing forward. Though the way I went with this, Chad, was like helping that new manager think about ways that they could use their talents to help their team
Okay.
reframe failure.
All
So
right.
if you'll allow me to go there a little bit,
No.
I think if we can help the manager help reframe that failure as this learning experience, like something that we can learn from, I'm saying like which talents might you have as a manager to help focus on some incremental growth. So like I'm thinking
Mm,
developer here, like
okay.
seeing some incremental growth and not necessarily focused all on the outcome. Me as achiever, and I will say probably most people with high executing talents are going to be like highly trained on the what gets done, like, and probably the how it gets done. So we know that that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be focusing on the like, maybe the final picture. But when they're learning, it's really good to understand like it's okay to help people fail up and keep moving forward. So I think that one's a big one. And then I think remembering as a manager that you don't have to be the one to like help everyone through everything. So maybe it's creating opportunities for others in your team to fail, but not but without catastrophic consequences. So like maybe there's like putting checks and balances in place so that like you can learn but in a safe environment. Maybe it's training and mentoring. And not that you as the new manager need to be the trainer or the mentor, but maybe you're partnering up someone who's newer or who has been struggling at something with someone else so that they can learn from one another. Because chances are, even someone brand new to a role and someone who's been doing it for 20 years, you will learn something from each other because
Right.
we are just different people. We do things different ways. And watching someone else do the same job as you're like, now hold on, I've been doing this for 20 years. I never saw anybody do it
Yeah.
that way before. So I think there's ways that we can learn from one another and then, like make that failure not such a dire consequence, that or dire thing that happens. And then I think it would be really important to create a safe space of like, well, let's try it. And I know we can't do that with everything, but I think it would be great to have a culture or a time and space where projects can be started, for those who have high strategic thinking and they always have these new ideas and, oh, we should do it this way. And everybody's like, no, 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 this is the tried and true way. This is the way we're going to do it. But can you like infuse some of that, like, well, let's try it and see how this works out, so that we're like destigmatizing failure. Like
Yeah.
it's not, see, I told you that wasn't going to work, like let's go back to how can we help people use those as learning experiences. And maybe it's like baking some learning experiences in, baking in failure because it's how we learn.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you hit on so many good thoughts, Jen, that I just want to reinforce one of the things that I loved out of what you just said and think have always thought should be involved in more of our business, regardless of what field you're in, is
Mm-hmm.
essentially more time to practice, not to make more work for
Yeah.
people. I know that we're already busy, but there are true game day moments And then
Yes.
there are the things that maybe we takes a little bit of time to like practice what some of those game day moments might look like. And
Yeah.
I don't have a perfect solution for that, but I've always thought that that's something sort of missing from our business life.
Yeah.
Me, and I've mentioned it before. I do youth soccer. Not every practice day is game
Right.
day. That's the opportunity for the kids to make mistakes or try new things. I
Yeah.
worked with another coach, and he told them, one practice, on a couple different practice sessions, I want you to try something new today. I don't care if it works or not. I just want you to try it. So you had
Yeah.
kids trying different, foot moves or trying, some of the trick shots they see from the pros. They
Right.
may or may not have pulled them off, but at least they had the opportunity. We had baked in the expectation of you should try stuff today because if you
Yeah.
get it to work and you get comfortable with it and you know it might work on game day, then bring it there. But not every day is game day. So
Right.
I loved the fact that the idea of baking in failure or the opportunity to try new
Yeah.
things is really important. The other thing
Yes.
I wanted to come back to, which you launched a new idea for myself, um, when coaching the managers themselves should be aware of what talents each of their team members might use to get themselves out of or rebound
Yeah.
from a failure. So maybe I don't have an election, but my team member is really self-reflective because they have high intellection, and then they can kind of see, oh, this is kind of where it went all went wrong,
Yeah.
and now they have that awareness to bring into their next project. And so I just think it's really smart for new team leaders, people managers,
Yeah.
to really have a high understanding, a deep understanding of their people and what talents they might be able to essentially turn on or and encourage that person to lean into. Hey, this just happened. It's not a failure of you, it's a failure of we failed to do something.
Right.
Um what talents can you use to reflect on this experience, and then, as you said, learn from it.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was just a sort of an expansion of your awesome idea of like the leader needs to know what talents they're going to when they need to rebound from
Yeah.
their own failures. Just expanding that out to, hey, make sure you know your team members well enough that you can kind of flick on the right talents for them or
Right.
encourage them to tap into those to come back from down moments. um
That might be the place and the opening to be like, well, if that's a way that you've done that before, if that's how you've bounced back before, if this uh, intellection helps
yeah,
you like think up these ideas, these deep thoughts and whatever, what else could we do with that? Like what else did you want to try? Is there like new things that
right,
you've thought of before? Like what could we do with that? And like
yeah,
even putting that out to the team, I think that's a really great point of tapping
yeah,
into your team to
yeah,
understand them too. Because they
yeah,
could help themselves and the team. Yeah.
right,
Yeah, I
yeah.
love that.
So I want to build on a couple of your thoughts, or kind of, actually, I might even take it in a slightly different direction, but I think
Sure.
that there are some things you touched on that also apply to some thoughts I'd had around this, which is, um, if you're a new leader and maybe you've goofed in your new role or you have failed to accomplish
Mm,
something maybe on the timeline that you had expected, bringing those expectations
yep.
back into this conversation. I think it's really important to, as part of that self-reflective experience, think about which themes were running in the raw side, which themes were not being used in their best way possible. So, for example, um, my deliberative and arranger might want to have the perfect plan, yet most of us realize that plans really survive first contact, right? it's
Right.
it's uh,
Yep.
it's been attributed to a couple different people, but you can have a game plan getting into the boxing ring, but I believe it was Mike Tyson says that plan rarely survives the first punch.
Sure.
So it's that same sort of thing of like there are raw talent. If I'm not utilizing or if I'm overdoing deliberative and ranger and trying to force something,
Yep.
that's going to lead to, it could be internal expectation failure. It could be failure of that plan actually being put into place. The other one is the other theme I thought of, which I have way low on my list on my talent theme list, is command. Did you use your talents to
Oh,
advocate for your people, or did you use them to run over your people? So,
yep.
did you fail at something because you dictated, you micromanaged, they all of a sudden withdrew, became psychologically unsafe, and then
Yeah.
therefore the kind of the whole puzzle fell apart. I think that that's something that's worth thinking about. How did your themes come out in that failure? Um, and then sort of an aside to that is, which themes weren't you tapping into at all that you didn't bring to the game board to help have something be successful? So you failed at something. Is it because you didn't apply some of your themes that maybe you should have?
Yeah.
So maybe it was a really loosey goosey plan to start with, and you could have brought your discipline or you could have brought your strategic thinking to refine it and have it be a little bit more actionable and understood by others. But if you didn't bring that to the table, a loosey goosey plan isn't going to get you anywhere. So I think
Right.
that's something else.
Or
Um,
vice versa. You had a great plan, but you didn't communicate it to anybody.
right.
Like,
Yeah. So
oh,
communication could have not come to the
sure.
table, right?
Right.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
great point. Great point.
Love those.
Um, so I think those would be two things. The other piece that I was really going to say is, if you are a new manager and you are essentially moving to that new role, right? You've already had kind of failed the old role. You've decided you need a different environment or you want to do something different. Um, Making sure you know what you bring and need from your new environment
Yeah.
so that you are giving your best, but also that you are getting what you were missing in the last role.
Yeah.
Because if you have a much better understanding of what you bring and need, then you're going to be a lot more successful and probably avoid some of those failures. So, personal example, I'm going to go back to my Vermont Futures Project work. The work was great, and I was enjoying a lot of the work. I was enjoying a lot of the data analysis. I was using my learner a lot. But again, that long-term planning, right? That responsibility
Yep.
was not being fully tapped into, or wasn't able to sort of fulfill it. So then,
Yep.
I wasn't getting what I needed from the role. And that's no fault of the role or the position or the
Sure.
people around me. It was just the way the work was designed.
Yep.
And just knowing that, I think for new managers, understanding what you need or what was missing from before will be really important for helping them be successful and avoid not so much avoid failure, but be more successful.
Sure.
So those would be my
Oh,
two
those
big thoughts
those
on
are
on
those
new
are
on new
great, Chad.
managers. So
Oh, great.
we've hit our big questions for our,
We
our
have.
episode. Do you have any other last minute thoughts you want to toss out to our listeners?
I'm going to just go back to check your expectations. So if the expectations set for you are too low and you have some higher ones, that's okay. Make sure they're realistic. And when you meet them, don't just reset the goalpost, farther away and higher or whatever that may be, and then focus on the fact that you didn't meet that. Like, set yourself some real expectations. I think let's go back. Let's start there with setting
Yeah,
some realistic expectations.
yeah,
How
awesome.
about
That's
you?
a that's
Do you
that's a really good one. I think it's the one I really wanted to. There are two that I really wanted to highlight, which is a understand that failures are learning opportunities, and if those aren't being treated that way in your environment, find a new room,
Yep.
find a new group of people to work with, whether it's internal or external to your current employer. Um, I think the other piece is really be aware of how your talents are coming into or how they might be generating certain failures. Um, maybe with that raw side or that completely not showing up piece.
Right.
But then also, how can you use them to then learn from them? We talked a lot about using them as learning opportunities. But what other themes? I lean on learner because that's at the top of my list. But there are
Yep.
other ways you can learn. And is it somebody like Input that is collecting all those bad experiences and figuring out some sort of pattern within that to then apply. Maybe it's analytical. You analyze, what's gone wrong. So I just think that there's what talents do you bring to understanding your learning opportunity and what lessons you're going to take out of it. So those would be my
Great.
two quick takeaways to sort of sum up this episode.
Love it.
So as Jen and I sign off, I'm going to keep encouraging everyone to keep playing to your strengths.
And be uniquely you.
If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts.